Hey guys, Ruckus Gaming here, coming at you with another episode of Tuesday Tips and Tricks. Today we're going to be taking a look at our final installment of the Ironclad tier list series, Rare Cards. So without further ado, let's just jump straight into it. First up on the rare card list is Barricade. For 3 cost or 2 upgraded, you will no longer lose a block at the beginning of your turn. I'm going to throw this right at the top of B tier. I think this is obviously a card that can be a key piece to a deck that wins by blocking, obviously. When you keep your block from turn to turn, you store it when you don't need it, you build it up, especially with things like Second Wind, Power Through, and more than any other, Entrench. If you have Barricade and Entrench, you're probably going to win, as long as you don't have terrible draw order or a very bad mistake. That being said, it really only does function in one kind of deck, a block deck. You know, if you are not doing that, then this card is absolutely useless to you. It's also a bit hard to get into play unupgraded. 3 cost, you really want to get that upgrade, because a Barricade block that deck that does not play Barricade is not going to win. This is very similar to Corruption in that cards or decks that are based around this card need to play this card to win, and if you don't, you're going to have a bad time. So, considering the fact that I generally judge the value of a card based on its flexibility and the variety of cases you are able to use it, I would say Barricade in B is generous. Let's just leave it there. Next up, we have Berserk. This is a 0 cost power that will grant you extra energy each turn, but at the cost of giving you stacks of vulnerable. Upgraded, it only gives 1 stack of vulnerable. Honestly, I don't use this card very often. I'm going to put this in C tier. The vulnerability is a huge drawback, especially later in the game as enemies scale up. You really don't want to be vulnerable. You want to avoid debuffs as much as possible. Obviously, if you have a way around it, like a panacea, clockwork, a souvenir, whatever, orange pellets, that would be the main thing. This is going to be great. And extra energy is always good, but it's always important to balance that extra energy against this cost. Perhaps Ironclad's ability to heal himself makes this a little less bad, but still, at the end of the day, I think there are other easier ways to get energy, and there are also better rares that you would rather see from elites and boss fight combats. So for those reasons, I'm throwing Berserk in C tier. Our next Ironclad rare is Bludgeon. This is a 3 cost attack that does a whopping 32 damage and upgrades to 42 damage. I am also going to throw this in B tier, right under Barricade. The reason I'm putting this in B tier and below Barricade, despite the fact that it is a fantastic Act 1 card, is that it falls off quite hard. Act 2, it can still be playable. Act 3, Act 4, not so much. It does have an amazing upgrade, again, especially early on. If you transform or you get a very early rare, if you get something from a shop and you see this Bludgeon, you should definitely take it Act 1, because it will basically win Act 1 for you. It will end those hallway fights very quickly and easily. You get lots of quick, free, easy card rewards, potions, etc. Great Act 1. After that, it gets a little tricky. Now, if you get a Snecko, if you get a Necronomicon, it can be okay. If you have absolutely tons of energy, great. But I think most of the time, especially after mid-act 2, most of the time you draw a bludgeon, you're probably just not going to play it unless it's lethal. And it can be lethal at a much higher range than other cards. But it's still something that will probably just sit in your deck and not get played very often after you get a little higher up in the Spire. Next up we have Brutality. This is a 0-cost power. It allows you to trade taking 1 HP of damage for drawing 1 more card. Again, I'm going to put this in B tier. We're starting off with a lot of mid-tier cards here. I think Brutality is pretty good. It's alright. I think the cost of paying 1 HP to draw 1 more card is not very large. I think that's a pretty fair trade to make. Ironclad obviously is able to heal himself, so you don't mind taking damage too much, especially small amounts of damage. There are lots of things like self-forming clay that would be great, or a centennial puzzle, or runic cube, not capacitor, runic cube. If you take 1 damage, that's pretty good actually. On the other hand, the upgrade is just okay. It becomes an innate card, so it will always be in your hand turn 1. Which means you will be drawing more cards each turn for the rest of the fight, which is very nice, but I still think there are probably better powers out there that will more directly lead to a win than Brutality. Brutality kind of indirectly makes your deck better by just allowing you to draw and see more cards, and there's no understating how good more draw is, but at the same time, it doesn't really win combats on its own in a real way. So this is a mechanical card, this is a support card, and not one that I would really put up any higher than B, especially compared to some of the other cards that we're about to take a look at. Next up, we have Corruption, and I will just let you know now, this is going to be the tippy top S tier card for the whole list. I am always happy to see Corruption, and it contrasts in a lot of great ways with Brutality. It is a 3-cost card as opposed to 0, upgraded to 2, and it's similar in that it is a functional card. It doesn't actually do damage on its own, but this is a run-winning card. The function that it has, exhausting skills until you only have attacks left, is how you win, not just drawing more cards like Brutality. And when you exhaust those skills, you draw those attacks faster, you speed up your combat. It's a very unique form of scaling that Ironclad has the best access to. Other characters have cards that exhaust and such, but he is the only one really based around continually making his deck as small as possible. So very much in the class fantasy, the power fantasy of a barbarian, a warrior type thing. It just fits Ironclad so perfectly in so many ways. And the bad side is, of course, the cost can be hard to play. I mentioned is also very similar to Barricade in that if you have a Corruption deck going and you don't play Corruption, it's probably not going to go very well for you. So you're kind of always going to need to play it. The other downside, I guess, is the fact that you need to be aware of timing. Most hallway fights, this is not going to matter at all. You can exhaust all of your skills, and by the time you do, it will be over. However, there are much longer fights, some elites, and definitely bosses, the heart fight in particular. You really need to pick and choose your moments. If you play it too early, you may exhaust all of your defense, all of your skills before you're actually finished with the combat, and that is another pretty bad feeling. So, despite being the best Ironclad card, you do still need to exercise a modicum of caution, but it's a great card, and if you see it with Snecko Eye, take it. It is great with Snecko Eye. It will reduce the cost of corruption itself, and once you have played corruption, all of those skills will still be 0. The corruption overrides Snecko's confusion debuff, and that's fantastic. And then you can just start taking up lots of multi-cost attacks that are going to get cheaper. Anyway, let's move on. Next up, we have Demon Form. This 3-cost power gives you 2 strength at the beginning of your turn, upgraded to 3 strength at the beginning of your turn. I'm going to throw Demon Form right in the bottom of D tier. There's a couple of reasons why. Obviously, it's expensive, it's hard to play. Number 2, it's slow. It doesn't do anything on the turn you play it. It only starts working the next turn. And 3, despite infinite strength sounding really, really cool, it's just not necessary. You don't need to have dozens and dozens of strength to win a fight. Many times, just 6 to 10 strength will do it. So, what it offers has diminishing returns. Eventually, you're going to get to the point where 2 or 3 more strength just isn't going to matter. If you're hitting some enemy for 300, or you're hitting some enemy for 1,000, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Even against the heart, because of the invincible cap. So at some point, you're either just insta-killing with 300 or you're insta-killing with 1,000. So what it offers is just going to get worse over time at some point, because it just doesn't actually provide more value than it did previously. For those reasons, I would say this is probably the worst form power of any of the characters. You know, you've got Echo Form, Wraith Form, and Deva Form. Deva Form is very similar, but I think it's still probably better. It's just not a great card. It's really hard to pull off. It's slow, it's expensive, and there are many, many, many other ways to get strength that are better than this. Next up, we have Double Tap. This is our first skill rare for the Ironclad, and I think this skill is interesting. It's also kind of a trap. This allows you to play your next attack twice. If you upgrade it, it allows you to play your next 2 attacks twice. I'm gonna put that at the bottom of B tier. I think this is average. I think playing 2 attacks, or at least 1 attack. If you can play 2 attacks upgraded, it's probably better than just bottom of B tier. But the fact that Ironclad has so many expensive attacks means that after you play this, you may only be getting 1 attack in anyway. So if you could have just spent this energy to play a second attack, maybe it would have been better. Maybe you could do, you know, cleave and a pommel strike instead of 2 cleaves. So it can be really good if you get it upgraded, if you have lots of cheap attacks. Maybe you've got a Snecko that is reducing the cost of attacks, making them free. That would be a great time to pick up a double tap. Most of the time, though, I think you're probably just better off playing 2 attacks. The next rare we're going to talk about is Exhume. This is a 1-cost skill that upgrades to 0 and will pull an exhausted card out of your exhaust pile so you can play it 1 more time. This is going right up into A tier, not A tier, S tier. This is an absolutely amazing card. I love Exhume. There are a lot of really, really great Ironclad cards that Exhume, because like 1/3 of all of his cards or not exhume, exhaust. A third of all of his cards exhaust. So chances are, if you see an exhume, you're probably already going to have something in your deck that exhausts and is pretty good. And you're going to want to play it more than once. So exhume is just great for that. It's a wonderful card. I think it's very versatile. It's very flexible. You can choose if you want to go for an attack or a power or not a power, but a skill. And it just lends itself to basically any kind of deck for Ironclad. Doesn't matter if it's a block deck, doesn't matter if it's a strength deck, doesn't matter if it's self-harm deck. It's literally just everything. Exhume is amazing. The next rare on our list is Fiend. This will deal 12 damage and then give you 3 max HP to your total HP. Upgraded, I think it goes to 14 damage and 4 max HP granted. And of course, you must use this to kill the enemy. You can't just play it any time, and you can also not use this on minions. Things like the gremlins from Gremlin Leader. Things like daggers from Reptomancer. Those cannot be fed upon. They have the minion keyword. Despite those limitations, this is an S tier card, and much like Corruption, this is one of those cards, as soon as I see it, I start thinking, win. Having an extremely high max HP makes everything easier because you don't really need to worry about blocking at all. There are a lot of really big chunky attacks in Act 3 and Act 4. Single turns with upwards of 40 damage to 60 damage. And the biggest challenge in any given run is usually figuring out how to deal with those particular turns. That could be something like Intangible, that could be something like Vault, whatever, going infinite. If there are scary turns, there's lots of ways to deal with them, and one of them is just having lots of max HP. You can let it hit you and just keep going. Absolutely wonderful, and something that if you do have it, you should be stalling every single combat and making sure that you use this at least once every single combat. If you have Feed in your deck and you're not gaining max HP every combat, you're doing it wrong. You really, really are. There are some circumstances where, of course, you may look at your draw pile and you're gonna get a big attack next turn. You don't think you can get around to Feed on the reshuffle or something like that. Like, obviously, don't trade huge damage for a small amount of max HP, but that should be your number one goal. Anytime you have a Feed is, how can I make sure that I play this and get the HP? Next up, we have Fiend Fire, another one of Ironclad's really popular attacks. I may catch some fire here for this, but I'm going to throw it in A tier, not S tier. This might be a reflection of my own shortcomings. Perhaps I'm just using it wrong. It is a very powerful card. I love the fact that it exhausts and it works with so many of those Ironclad synergies, whether it's Feel No Pain, Dark Embrace, what have you. It scales with strength, which is so nice. Having just a little bit of strength with Fiend Fire is very, very strong, and it's single target, so you can focus all of that damage where you really want. You can take down the Reptomancer and just ignore those daggers, stuff like that. The downside is, of course, that because it's 2 cost and because it exhausts all of your hand, it can be challenging to play all of the cards you actually want to play each turn. There may be times when you can't kill with Fiend Fire and you're looking at your hand and you're saying, wow, these are some pretty good cards I may actually want to have later, or I may want to play more than one or two of these other cards right now, and you have a dilemma where you have a very hard choice to play Fiend to Fire now and do a decent amount of damage, or do you perhaps block, or do you play an important power, etc. If you have your synergies already set up, Feel No Pain, Dark Embrace, what have you, the decision is a lot easier. If you've got a Dead Branch, it's a lot easier, because the main problem generally ends up being is that you choose to play this Fiend to Fire and then you often have energy left over, or you are missing some important pieces that will make the combat harder later down the line. So for those small reasons, I drop it down to A, just because this is not something that you want to see in every single deck. Obviously, if you're running a block deck, you don't need a Fiend Fire. And it's not something that you can just always play anytime you draw it. You do have to find the moment for it. I'm still having a hard time because it sounds exactly like some of the same things that I've said about Corruption and Feed. You know, waiting for the right moment, playing it to win. But I think at the end of the day, Fiend Fire, despite being very powerful, can also be a bit of a shot in the foot. And you have to really know how to use it well, and maybe I'm just not there yet. Maybe someone with more experience could say something about it. But still a very, very good card. I would still take it in many situations. Next up, we have Immolate. This 2-cost attack will do 21 damage to all enemies, upgraded to 28 damage, and it will also add 2 burns to your discard pile. I'm going to put this in A tier as well, and I would judge it as roughly equal to Fiend to Fire. I don't know if I would say it's below Fiend to Fire or Fiend to Fire is below Immolate. They have very different purposes. Immolate is, of course, AoE damage. It is amazing in Act 1 particularly, when you can use it to end combats extremely quickly. There are quite a few combats with more than one enemy in Act 1. And Act 1 Fiend Fire, not so great. You don't have big hands, and you don't have a lot of cards in the deck, so you don't really want to exhaust a lot of it out too quickly. You're going to have nothing left. The burns that Immolate will give you in the discard pile, I think, are not as big of an issue as some players, or newer players especially, may think. Obviously, status cards are bad, but think about where it's going. The discard pile. That means you're very likely going to be able to end this combat, especially a hallway combat, before you even see those burns. You're going to have to play through your whole draw pile, your whole deck, not maybe 3, 4, 5 turns. And then you've got to reshuffle, and you've got to draw until you get to those burns. Maybe they're on top, maybe they're on bottom, who knows, but that's another couple turns maybe. Not a lot of hallway fights are lasting 8 to 10 turns. It's only going to be a factor in longer fights, and there are ways around it. Obviously, Ironclad has lots of exhaust mechanics. Fiend Fire, Second Wind, Sever Soul, True Grit, all those are great ways to get rid of just a couple burns. I think Ironclad decks tend to be pretty chunky. 30 plus cards is pretty normal, so just 2 burns is not a huge deal. It does not scale with strength super well, and it does not scale into the late game super well, which I think is the main reason I am putting this behind Fiend Fire, if slightly. Fiend Fire starts off not so strong and tends to get stronger over the run. Immolate starts really strong and kind of falls off. Next up is Impervious. This is our first block card as a rare, and it's a big one. For 2 energy, you can gain 30 block, upgraded to 40 block. I'm going to throw this at the bottom of A tier. It is a lot of block. It can go a long way to solving some of those really tough turns that we talked about. But often it also feels excessive. You know, if this is the only block card in your hand and you're getting attacked for like 15 damage, you're like, is this enough damage that I want to block? Or is there something later, like, you know, a hyper beam from Vaughn's Automaton that I'm really going to want this for? So you do have a problem where you find yourself in that dilemma. Do I play this now or hold on to it later? I think generally speaking, when I'm looking at like an S tier card versus an A tier card, I'm thinking about like, is this a card that I'm just going to play all the time, or is so important that I must play it as much as possible to win? Obviously, you can only play a corruption once or a feed once per combat, so you can't be, you know, playing it multiple times like some attack. But at the same time, playing that corruption or that feed is building a situation for you to win. Impervious is mostly just making you not die. Maybe if you've got a barricade and entrench and you're going to block deck, Impervious is amazing, and it will jumpstart that block. Or you've got calipers and, you know, you're losing a 15 block but you're keeping some of it. You know, Impervious could be really good, but I think a lot of times you're really just taking it for insurance and hoping that you draw it on the right turn. It's really powerful, but I think there aren't often enough situations for you to use it in, which does hurt it a bit. Juggernaut is our next power, and this 2-cost power will deal 5 damage to a random enemy every time you gain block, upgraded to 7 damage to a random enemy. I'm going to put this in C tier, and I'm going to leave it there. I don't know if I would say it's above or below Berserk yet. Maybe I'll talk myself into it, but Juggernaut obviously is going to be most useful in the Ironclad block deck archetypes when you've got your barricade, you've got Feel No Pain, you've got Second Wind for multiple instances of gaining block, and it would be absolutely amazing. Unfortunately, I think that most Ironclad decks don't have enough block support to really make this Juggernaut really useful. Even if you've got a Feel No Pain and you're exhausting, the fact that it's random damage split across enemies, you can't direct it, it's just a little unreliable. If you're in a single target fight, it's much better, obviously, but it's always very painful when you really, really need that random damage to hit the dagger or to hit, you know, some low HP enemy and knock them out and really help you solve the fight, and it hits somebody else and it's like, ugh. So I generally like to reduce RNG as much as possible, and something like this where it's random damage to an enemy is just kind of There are definitely better rare cards. There are definitely better powers. So if you're going into an elite fight, you're going into the end of the act, and your reward is a Juggernaut, chances are when you went into that fight, you were not thinking, oh boy, I hope I get Juggernaut. You're probably thinking corruption. You're probably thinking feed. You know, maybe you're thinking barricade if you've already got, you know, Second Wind and Entrench and Dark Embrace or whatever. It's like you've got a couple cards already go in the block direction, Juggernaut might look good, but even then, like, it's still not the number one card you're going to be thinking of, because you're going to be thinking Barricade. Next up, we have Limit Break. This will double your strength, and if you upgrade it, then it will become a card that does not exhaust, and you can play multiple times. This is painful for me because I absolutely love this card, and I probably overvalue this card. But from on paper and from what other people have said, some very well respected and knowledgeable players, I think Limit Break is top of B tier. If you think about this like a Catalyst, and you say, well, if Catalyst is S tier for the silent, why is Limit Break only B tier for Ironclad? One reason is kind of what I alluded to before with Demon Form, in that an infinite amount of strength is not necessarily super useful. You don't need to have 200 strength or 100 strength even. You can win lots of fights with a lot less than that. It's a lot of fun though. There are other ways to gain strength for the Ironclad, and it's only double. Catalyst upgrades to triple, which I think is much stronger. Here, with Limit Break, the real issue is that if you don't have any strength yet, it doesn't do anything. So draw order is very important, much like it is with the Silent and Catalyst. Probably even more so because I think she has better deck control. She has well-laid plans. She has lots of draw and discard that Ironclad does not really have the same kind of access to. So she has more ability to play around with the draw order and how she gets to play that Catalyst. Ironclad just doesn't really have the same kind of draw and deck manipulation support that Silent does. So when you have a card that relies on synergies and draw order, it's going to hurt him a little bit more than it hurts her. Also, the fact that this can work against you. If you have negative strength and you play this, you will get more negative strength. I've seen it happen. And it's absolutely ridiculous, but it says double, and if you double a negative, it goes double negative. Can't go negative poison. And I think also the reason Catalyst is S tier and this is not, it is damage that you can count on no matter what every turn. Even if you have a bad draw order and you get all of your skills and powers in one hand and you have no attacks to play, that poison is still going to be doing its job. Limit Break won't. You need to draw attacks for this to work. Obviously, Ironclad is going to be drawing lots of attacks, but there's always those turns where you just kind of get a crappy hand, and in that situation, Limit Break just isn't going to do very much. Whereas Catalyst doesn't care. It's always going to do its job. As long as you've got the poison on, you're gravy. Next up, we have Offering. This card will take 6 HP to grant you 2 energy and draw 3 cards. That will upgrade to draw 5 cards. This is my last S tier Ironclad card for the list. It is just extremely functional. It doesn't matter what your deck is doing. It doesn't matter what kind of deck you have. This will be good. You get energy, you get draw. Obviously, you have to pay a little HP for it, but with your starter relic, it's essentially free, and it may even play into your synergy if you have like a rupture or something like that. More energy, more draw is just really good. I mean, that's all you can really say. For any deck, any character, doesn't matter. More energy and more draw is good. Really, really good. Take this card. Reaper is our next Ironclad rare. This attack will deal 4 damage to all enemies, upgraded to 5 damage to all enemies, and then it will restore that amount of HP to you. So however much damage you do is how much you will heal. I'm going to pop this right at the tippy top of A tier. This is a wonderful card. Having a card in your deck pool that can heal you is pretty unique. This is something that neither the Silent or Watcher have. Only Defect with Self-Repair and the Ironclad have cards within their own pool that will heal them. For Ironclad, you're obviously going to need this because of his many cards that will reduce his own HP, such as an Offering, a Bloodletting, Hemokinesis, what have you. Even if you don't have those cards, this is still going to be great for sustain. This allows you not to go to campfires, or at least not to rest at campfires so much. Skipping resting and getting those upgrades, getting those keys, even using relics like Shovel or Girya or Peace Pipe, whatever it is. Going to campfires and not resting is always something you want to be doing. So the downside is, of course, that you really need some strength to make this work. Obviously, that is something that Ironclad is pretty good at doing, so you don't struggle with that very often. You may not see this very much in block decks because block decks just don't rely on strength. They scale in a very different way. So in that sense, this is not a card that I think every single Ironclad deck is going to really make the most out of. Of course, it also is better if you are in fights with multiple enemies, so you're getting more sources of HP to heal you back. Again, not necessarily something that is absolutely a must, but it is just a way to maximize. You don't need Reaper to give you a massive heal every single combat. I think that's something that people often worry about is, I need to get a big heal off with this combat every time. Like feed, I need to get feed off every time. I don't think you really do. Even if you do take some damage and you want to heal, you may not necessarily have a really conducive situation. Whether it's the draw, whether it's the combat, whatever it is. There's a lot of times where you pretty much just want to get out of the fight before you die, and stalling for Reaper would not help you as much as you hope. Maybe you do get the Reaper off, but you end up taking even more damage and you end up basically at the same spot. That's not really how you should be thinking about a Reaper. What you should be thinking about is looking out for combats you can use it in. Saying, okay, I just had a really tough elite fight, but now I'm going up against Darklings. And I know that I can outscale these guys. I can stall this fight. I can build up my strength, and I can get a massive heal here. I don't need to get a massive heal against Giant Head. That's not going to do much for me. He's only one enemy, and I have a very limited number of turns to build up my strength before I can do enough damage to kill this guy before he outscales me. So this is not something that I think is an absolute must-play priority like an S tier card, but it is something that when you find the right moment to play it, it will be extremely valuable, and it will go a very very long way to getting you a win. And that is it. All of the Ironclad cards ranked on their own tier list by rarity. Common, uncommon, and rare. Thank you guys for sticking around to the end, and thank you for watching the whole series. I do plan on continuing this series with the other characters, but I don't want to do too much of this kind of content right in a row. So I will be shaking it up again next Tuesday with something different. Not exactly sure what it might be yet. Could be going back to some what episodes. Maybe we can do some achievement episodes. Let me know, guys. Drop a like, share, comment. Just yeah. You know all that. Let me know if there's anything you want to see in particular, and I can get to work on it. As always, thanks for watching, and have a great day. Thanks for watching Ruckus Gaming.